The Symphony of Canterlot, Chapter 11, Debt to the Moonlight, The Devil's Crusade. I opened my eyes, and it was the middle of the day, probably morning. I looked at the ceiling, and it looked like the kind of plain white ceiling with a single lamp that you would expect from a hospital. I looked to my right, and I saw a direct vein injection in my right foreleg. The line was connected to a glass bottle filled with a glowing blue liquid of some sort. I was too groggy to really identify it. I moved my head and saw a midnight blue fur, and I looked up and I saw the clear turquoise eyes of the most beautiful mare in the world. Interestingly, without her royal regalia in my presence and with her starry mane flowing in an unseen breeze, she was looking at me with the fury of an angry goddess. To those that would have seen from outside the door would have thought that I had been the luckiest stallion in the world to have a princess worry about me and bother to come to my bedside. To those that could look from my angle would have said that it was nice knowing me and that they felt sorry for the janitor that was going to have to scrape my innards off the floor in a minute. You may all know her as Princess Luna, the mistress of the night, the messenger of Regine, and the true goddess of 8 banners. The blood-soaked king, the mad princess, and finally, Admiral Celine.
"Fool, what wast thou thinking?"
she said, with a rather frustrated tone, I might add. "So I live, I see," I responded with utmost cheer and possible suicidal intent. She yelled at me with,
"This is no time to jest."
I responded with, "Sorry, princess, but I really do think that this is the time to jest. For the greatest jest had been played on us, one where the Unicorn Royal Guard command is untrustworthy and possibly traitorous.
One where I see that Arpeggio Philharmonic's daughter Octavia is undergoing magically assisted domestic abuse by his wife on his permission.
One where I nearly died by the traps of knowledgeable mages with access to something potentially catastrophic. The thing is that the jest is on us, and only those under the banner of Sonorad will laugh." Her irises reduced to the size of pinpricks, and she asked the oblivious,
"Celestial's Royal Guards are involved in this?"
"Seems so. Not that surprising. The amount of Unicorn Royal Guard officers that are from a noble lineage is not few by any stretch of the imagination. And casual racism is Unicorn nobility's favorite pastime here in Canterlot. Next to incestuous orgies and overpriced Gallic wine, of course," I replied with the best neutral expression that I could. These were facts after all. Interestingly enough, she responded with,
"Alas, some things never change, but we have one inquiry. What is domestic abuse?"
I swiftly answered in mild annoyance with the simplest answer. "Well, spouse and child beating. That is against the law of the land now, your majesty." Princess Luna actually said something interesting.
"We see."
"Great. I'm guessing that my contract is going to be burned due to the obvious break of confidentiality," I answered sincerely.
"Nay,"
Princess Luna said, interestingly enough again, and with a slight smirk. That could have been really good or really bad. I wasn't really sure which was which. And then, I heard the clicking of metal shoes on tile as she entered. The Princess of the Sun herself, Princess Celestia, the Light of the West, the Golden Axe of the Dawn, and finally, the swift punch of Discord's bullocks. She trotted in with poise and purpose, looking right at my face. She was wearing her full golden and jewel-encrusted regalia, her mane a flowing, multicolored range of the full light spectrum, and the face of disappointment. Oh joy, oh joy. As soon as she was next to her younger sibling, Princess Celestia said,
"But you and I have something to discuss, Dr. Folklore."
Crap. It may seem strange, but she matters. 4th month, day 6 of year 1 RL, 10 a.m. My name is Lyra Heartstrings, and I did something awful. I abandoned a pony to a terrible fate. Sure, I may have told her to go to a shelter or go to the police, but considering her tormentors were her own family and knowing full well who her family was, that was useless. I didn't tell her who could actually help her. I knew who, but I was too scared back then. Too concerned for my job, too concerned for my life. I mean, really, who was I fooling? Mentioning a few made-up horror stories and a fake horror radio show wasn't exactly the best way of trying to portray that I didn't know what was going on. What life was I gonna live if I didn't do something? If I ignored the suffering of some pony I considered a friend, sure, I only met Octavia Philharmonic only a few days ago, but given that we worked together and that we shared drinks, I think that I have the right to call her a friend. I just wouldn't be able to live with myself if I just waited for it to unfold before me. And plus, there was a whole lot of noble killing that needed to happen. I was just a musician from Manhattan, but I knew ponies. Ponies and a griffin that could help. And back then, I just hoped that he would show up, and last I heard, he was dead, which is why it perplexed me that after I burned his card without thinking, he responded immediately with a note in the mail a day after. On another note, telling her to go to a shelter or to the police probably wasn't the best of ideas. Last I heard, the Canterlot Police First Lieutenant was an old boarding school friend of Arpeggio, and shelters are not that good to actually protect you unless they're backed by illegally acquired guns. One of those ponies I knew was Folklore. I met Folklore back in the day in Manhattan a couple of years ago, before I met my bonbon. At the time, I may have graduated Summer Melody School of the Performing Arts, but I still needed to work in between the time that I was hired by the Canterlot Orchestra — I should have stayed in Manhattan — and I found work with an information broker with an office in Zingtown. As it turns out, he also ran the Brickling Sun, which was rather surprising. My job wasn't really that big of a deal. I mostly gathered odd rumors circulating around, and I was investigating strange noises in the Nassau County of Long Island, which were believed to be the cause of a lot of pet disappearances that had happened back then. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of poking too deeply. I ran into some monstrous owl equine-like freaks eating a copper raw. Naturally, I ran like the nightmare was on my ass. I informed my boss the next morning, and he told me to give the report to an expert that he knew in Zingtown. Let's just say that the expert was Folklore and that he took the job without a second thought, and in a couple of days I read some article about escaped contraband from Germania involving Fae in the Black Forest, or it was something like that, I don't remember. So on that note, I should have brought something nasty. For all I know, this could have been a setup, and I still value my life enough to have had genuine worry about this whole meeting going south, but alas, caution was thrown into the wind at some point, and I realized that working for the Canterlot Orchestra was not all it was cracked up to be. Live and learn, right? I was waiting in the Black Pot Cafe in Canterlot Commercial District. It was a nice-looking cafe, odd location, but it was nice nonetheless. Interestingly, it was next to a decrepit-looking bookshop called Pages and Stories, though from what I heard, it once belonged to a charismatic magus that died a year or so ago. The new owner let it go downhill, but at the very least it had been said that he had reasonable prices and that he knew where every book in the shop is located by memory. Odd. You would think that someone like that would have had the place up and up, but who am I to judge? And did I mention that the cafe was empty? Because it was, and that made me uneasy. And not to mention that it made me wonder about a few things, like, why is it that the bookshop's second floor had a gaping pony-sized hole in the wall? Why was the cafe empty at this hour? Why was it that every part of me was screaming at me to run? And why was it that I suddenly was suspecting that Bon Bon was hiding something from me? Of course, these all would be questions that I would have to answer at another time, because at this time I just heard the door open and I was scared witless. I felt like the air itself was getting heavier, if that makes any sense, like whoever entered the room had the presence of death at their tail. Though regardless, I took a look. Through the door came a unicorn stallion wearing a dusty black woolen overcoat and a fedora. He had some sort of grayish-blue fur and a slicked-back black mane. His eyes were an eerie ember and his mouth was letting an unlit cigarette hang from it. I couldn't really believe that Folklore was there and he was still alive. Next to him was a brick-red mare with golden eyes and a blonde mane, wearing a black woolen overcoat, black lace leggings, and a gray tie. Did he get a new partner? I mean, last I saw him, his partner was a white mare with a pink mane fashioned in a bun. Redheart, I think she was called. Truth be told, I wasn't really sure. Both approached my table and sat right in front of me, and it was Folklore himself who started the conversation. "Miss Heartstrings, long time no see. So, how's been life treating you here in the city of pretentious arses?" he said in a rather sly way, almost as if he knew what I was gonna say. So, might as well throw him a curveball to see how he reacts.
Before we even get to that, Lore, I need to know, how are you even still alive?
I said, nearly yelling the last question with about as much tact as a rhinoceros that drank port wine. Luckily for me, that did the trick because he blinked twice at me, staring at nothing in particular, in raw bewilderment of the situation. I couldn't believe that I just did that. And then he answered. Well, let's get that bit of nonsense out of the way. I was impaled on a long piece of steel pipe through the chest and left to die by Nightmare Moon. Then, my unconscious bleeding self was brought to a Zingy's doctor to fix my insides and some of my outsides. And finally, my apartment was set ablaze by the very ponies that broke Nightmare Moon herself out of the moon. I, as a result, have been spending the last 8 months in recovery and hiding. So, how's your life been recently? I didn't even notice that my mouth was hanging open when he stopped. Oh, sweet Celestia, that did sound filthy when I thought about it.
Holy shit.
Sorry, but what response would you expect from me? That was freaking insane. If it weren't for the fact that he said it with such a straight face, that I already had read about his apartment being set on fire in the paper and that he was listed on the obituary, I probably would have told him to stuff it up his tail hole. With that, he hoofed a small bag of bits to the mare that I presumed to be his partner, and with a less than cheerful expression. Did they seriously place a bet at my reaction? Was this some sort of sick joke? He continued on. Alright, Miss Heartstrings. That said, I'm gonna have to tell you that I'm in the middle of a rather important job, but judging from your profession and who you associate with and the letter you sent when you burned my card, you know something that would prove crucial as evidence, meaning that both your case and the one I'm actually currently working on are intertwined. He knew more than I thought. At that moment, I considered that it actually could work in my advantage. Maybe I was wrong, but it was worth a shot.
This means that we have a common problem,
I said with confidence, though truth be told, I was just being optimistic. A problem that I'm currently dealing with, so tell me, do you want to participate in this little crusade? He said with a glint in his eye.
When do I start?
I said, ready to see where this would take me.
Oh, this is gonna be one for the ages,
His now more enthusiastic partner said with the sort of cheeriness that I would never expect in this situation. Folklore, though, had a grin that could scare a full-grown dire wolf with its apparent thirst for blood, and with that, he said, Well, let us begin then. I knew at that moment that my fate was sealed. Chapter 12. Interview with Sunlight Regarding the Moonlight. 4th month, day 4 of year 1, LR. Canterlot Castle, Celestial Archive Spire, 7:23 a.m. It was early by the standards of most ponies, and at the time, I was a mess. My mane was disheveled, a faint surgery scar ran through my chest and belly, and I was devoid of any formal clothing. I would never dare to meet a mare for breakfast in this state, much less one of the most, if not the most beautiful, and not to mention a mare that is the highest authority in the land. Speaking of which, Princess Celestia herself was sitting right in front of me. We were sharing a small tea table made of some really expensive-looking mahogany with a dark varnish, and she was sipping her well-earned Albion imported black tea using a fine Yixing porcelain teacup. I, on the other hoof, had difficulty even lifting mine. Normally, I would have asked for coffee instead, but considering my position, beggar can't be a chooser. We were in the Celestial Archives, and Celestia's personal records and collection of tomes dating back a good 500 years. This bastion of knowledge sat atop the tallest spire in Canterlot Castle. It was actually quite the magnificent sight, if I dare say so myself. But me and the fair lady of the sun were not alone. Around us were about 23 agents of the Equestrian Civil Service. They were bureaucrats, but decent bureaucrats. Essentially, the only bureaucrats that I was capable of tolerating. About 6 of them were managing 3 makeshift radio equipment stations, receiving and broadcasting what I can only discern as steady code. There were 4 lovely secretaries typing away their logs next to the radio teams. 2 zebras, a pegasus, and a unicorn, all mares, if you were asking. 7 telepathic earthen psychics, all mares around me, and Celestia, ready to discern the truth and the lies of anything I might say, all sitting on the marble floor in meditative positions, their eyes glowing in unnatural white. They were clad in white cloaks with flaming runes surrounding their seating areas. Behind Celestia herself was the gray, blackened, slightly wild-maned, and golden-eyed secretary of the equestrian government, Dotted Hieronymus Line. He was a short fellow, not really exceedingly so, but certainly for the standards of a northern unicorn. He was middle-aged, probably pushing his 50s, and he had a thick coat as expected of his blood ancestry and bags under his eyes, much like my own. He had the piercing eyes of a stallion that is increasingly frustrated by the idiocy that surrounds him. Give it a couple of days. This is what awaited me. He was accompanied by a couple of the hearth's warming ornaments that are usually referred to as the Aerial Royal Guard, in all their golden-looking enchanted brass armor and white coat giving enchanted helmet glory. The slight ear flicker on the one on the left was an indication against my presence. Royal Guards are trained to control all their facial expressions to the most minute detail. A slip-up like that is an indication of some serious aggression. Understandable, really. I wouldn't have liked me either in their position. After a few minutes of awkward tea drinking, and Mr. Line noting the time of his own fob, Princess Celestia addressed me with her concerns.
It's been a long time, Folklore. How has Compass been doing?
With all due respect, Your Royal Highness, Father has left to do the Celtic wilderness in the Old World a good 15 years ago. If he isn't dead, he's probably consulting with the ancient Fae, unaware of the passing of time. Not to mention, we haven't spoken since Mother passed. I replied as a matter of fact. Princess Celestia should have already known about this, though.
That is strange. He has been sending a barrel of blood mead every year since then. I figured that the rumors of his disappearance were greatly exaggerated, most likely by himself, and that you two stayed in touch. He has said many things about your exploits, after all.
Well, it seemed like he was at the time. Only Father would give Princess Celestia blood mead. That ancient brew is Her Highness's favorite, which is something that most don't know, and assume that Celestia is exclusively a wine drinker because of her royal status. But blood mead is a dead recipe from an ancient age. Only a versed scholar like Father could have known how to make it, or more likely, he simply has just been sending Celestia Fae brewed stock. Oh, and before you start about developing that pale look on your face, don't worry, blood mead is only red because of the plentiful use of red gooseberry. Nothing nefarious, I can assure you of that. Okay. Figures. If you're asking why I didn't worry for my father's safety, or why in fact I barely give a damn about it, it's because he started teaching me the ways of magic since I was 4, and he didn't believe in watering down the terrors of the reality of the world, no matter my age at the time. He also frequently scarred me straight every time I was out of line, and he was a harsh quarterstaff teacher. So, long story short, he was a formidable stallion who was never quite satisfied what I did in my life, and often mocked me. Though, in the long run, we only learned to be civil towards each other out of a mutual understanding that he did intend the best for me. That, and him finally admitting that he was proud of me after I finished the Doctor of Philosophy and Chemistry.
You should have more faith in him, Folklore. It's possible that he previously arranged the yearly shipment before he left.
The princess did have a point. He wouldn't consciously disappear for a year without a reason. But considering that I was a grown stallion and he was a magus with a life expectancy of 180 years, I probably shouldn't have ever been giving a damn. I'll take that into consideration, Your Highness, I said with a bit of regret. Not much I can do about it. Maybe being with the Fae would be a blessing compared to the madness that came after.
But I have to ask, Folklore, how is it that you came in contact with my sister?
She asked with genuine concern. Probably the reason she brought the telepaths. Well, where do I start? 1 week before. That night it was raining both softly and out of schedule. Not to mention that the magic surrounding the clouds wasn't that of the labor of several Pegasi, but of a single as yet unidentified individual. It was a massive outpour of magic, so much that the pain forced me to start popping 3 aspirins into my mouth while heading into the direction of where it was coming from. I could feel a sort of sadness from it, like something was lost, or there was something that was greatly missed. As I headed through the crowded streets, ignoring the soaked state of my coat and hat, the cold, and the fact that I was going against the direction of the crowd, I saw a tall figure by the neoclassical equestrian-style electric lamp on the corner. It was in the Clover Plaza of the commercial district, where the 300-year-old marble fountain stood. You know the one, Princess, the one that was made in honor of Clover the Clever. You did help build it after all. The figure was leaning against it, and as I got closer, I could hear a light sobbing, and it very much sounded like that of a mare. I stopped, simply deciding to sit next to her, and judging by the way that I felt that she was looking at me, she noticed my approach. I decided to speak and see if I could get an answer. I know, it must be hard to live with that ache, the weight in your heart that tells you how much of a monster you are, that you barely deserve to live, unworthy of forgiveness and unworthy of love. That the blood cannot be completely washed off your hooves, no matter how hard you try. All I heard then was the sound of the drops hitting the cobblestone and odd form of pseudo-silence, but one much more relaxing than true silence, the kind of silence that tells you that the world is not right. I then got back up on all fours and approached, wrapping my coat around her. In my right pocket is my card. If you need anything, make sure to burn it. With that said, I trotted back to the shop, ready for a hot shower and a bit of canned onion soup, thinking that it probably had been a waste of my time to give her the card. That, and also it was a perfectly good coat to boot. I thought that I probably wasn't gonna see it again. Getting the money for a new one required a job, which I lacked. So, in the end, it probably would have been for nothing.